This week in our 6-week series, we're going to be talking about empathy and rapport, one of the big six. So let's start off with a short clip from a movie that I know that I love, Legally Blonde.
The law is reason free from passion. Does anyone know who spoke those immortal words? Yeah.
Aristotle.
Are you sure?
Yes?
Would you be willing to stake your life on it?
I think so.
What about his life?
I don't know.
Well, I recommend knowing before speaking. The law leaves much room for interpretation, but very little for self-doubt. And you were right. It was Aristotle. Now, I assume all of you have read pages 1 through 48 and are now well-versed in subject matter jurisdiction. Who can tell us about Gordon versus Steele? Let's call on someone from the Hotzer. Elwoods.
Oh, actually, I wasn't aware that we had an assignment.
Oh. Vivian Kensington, do you think it's acceptable that Ms. Woods is not prepared?
No. I don't.
Would you support my decision to ask her to leave class and to return only when she is prepared?
Absolutely.
Now, this video shows a particularly harsh version of a professor not showing empathy and rapport. But even the most flippant things that we say to students can sometimes cause them to have negative reactions towards us and towards our class. With a student-centered mindset, we have to be driven by care and empathy. We want our students to learn. We care that they learn. We care that they do well in our courses. We come to know them by name and need, which means that we understand who's turning in assignments, who's not turning in assignments, and we care about whether or not they're doing that. The Gallup-Purdue Index demonstrated that a care for our students has an outsized impact on their lifetime learning. So strongly related to graduates' lives and careers, it's almost hard to fathom, yet few college graduates achieve the winning combination of the Purdue 6 factors. The more of these factors that the survey respondents reported receiving in college, the greater their degree of well-being and career success was. So we want to make sure that we try and incorporate all 6 of these into our students' college career. And empathy and care for people is one of the big 6. So these are the big 6, and you can see that professors who care about students as people is one of those big 6. We want to build a classroom community. Every class is unique. Sometimes you have classes that are very talkative and that are very engaged and very active, and sometimes you have classes that are less interested in the material, but it's our job to foster that excitement and to show care and empathy no matter what kind of class we have. It increases their willingness to participate if we foster a sense of community. So if we don't call out students or embarrass them in front of their peers. It's especially important to include access, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our classrooms and make sure that all of our students feel like they have access to the material, that they're treated equitably, which is different than equally, that there is diversity in thought, and that we encourage diversity in thought, and that we include everyone no matter what. You should treat your students like they are welcome and valued, because without our students, we wouldn't have a job. And let's look at the 5 strategies to help build an inclusive and fair classroom. So number 1, using student names. Everyone likes to be called by their name. Everyone likes that little bit of recognition. I use this every time I go to the grocery store or a drive-through. It makes that person feel an instant connection and like they are part of something bigger, and it makes them feel better. If you start incorporating this just in your daily life, you would be amazed at the number of people who smile back at you because they are not used to being called by their name. So we have to make more of an effort to learn our students' name and pronounce them correctly. I always, at the beginning of my classes, say, I'm going to try and say your name. I want you to correct me. If we show fallibility on our part and a little bit of vulnerability, it helps our students to connect to us more deeply. And we have to draw out those students who we notice are not participating. So we want them to notice and care how they're doing. If I had a student who didn't show up to class, I always sent them a text message through the Remind app or an email to say, hey, we missed you in class today. Is everything okay? Now, some students, they're just like, yeah, I just had something to do, but other students really needed that connection. And so that's part of showing care and empathy. Using culturally diverse examples, I think, is one of the most important parts of building a classroom environment. When I worked in a middle school, I had a lot of individuals who were Native American or First Peoples, and they don't see a lot of representation in science. So there was a program called Skype a Scientist, and you hooked up with a scientist via this program, and they would ask you questions about who your students were, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, those kinds of things, so that they could pair you with a scientist to come and speak to your class who looked like them and had experiences that were similar to them. Because a lot of times our students don't see themselves represented in our particular disciplines, science especially. So showing them examples of people who look like them is extremely important. Provide opportunities for collaboration. Not only does this help your students in retention, but it also helps to build that classroom rapport. It helps them to understand that there are other people that they can reach out to. Vary your teaching strategies. Neurodivergence is also an aspect of diversity. Those who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, epilepsy, these are all individuals that we need to include into our class. So students who are anxious or introverted find it hard to socially interact. So we don't need to force them to socially interact. So don't always use collaborative projects. We encourage collaboration because it does help them once they are out in the real world, but forcing that on them over and over again can have a counterintuitive effect. Promote access and equity. Equity is not the same as equality. I have seen a picture where there's 3 people who are standing behind a fence, and the first person is tall enough to see over it, the second person is almost tall enough, and then the third person is very short. Equality is giving everyone the same box to stand on. It raises that tall person up even taller. It puts that one person who can almost see over the fence able to see over the fence, but it still doesn't allow that small person to see over the fence. Equity is taking the fence away. And so we need to work on trying to provide those equitable and accessible opportunities in our classroom. Insist that your students treat one another with respect and refrain from monopolizing discussions. We have a lot to share, but your students also have unique experiences and unique perspectives that they can provide to your classroom. So to create a social classroom, establish a sense of belonging, Implement classroom management techniques that build community. So making sure that they understand to treat each other with respect and making sure that your views are known on equity and inclusion, and then model those intellectual approaches to your students. So most students will be more receptive to learning if they think that their instructor cares about them and trust that they'll be treated fairly. If I don't think that I'm going to get a fair shake in my class because my professor doesn't like me, I'm not going to try as hard. I had a professor when I was a freshman in Comp 1 class, which we all know all freshmen have to take, who told us on the very first day she didn't believe that freshmen deserved A's. And so it was very disheartening, and I didn't want to work as hard in her class because I knew I wasn't going to get an A. Positive rapport increases the chances that your students are going to attend, that they're going to participate, that they're going to turn things in, that they're going to retain that information. So we want to make sure that we build those positive relationships early and often. Talk about things other than course content sometimes. They need to see you as a genuine human being. Something that I always did on the first day was 2 truths and a lie, so that they could see that you were a real human being. Start your first class of the week by asking students to share something that they're proud of or that they're excited about. And take attendance by asking them different questions. I loved doing this. I loved asking, what's your favorite pizza topping, or who's your favorite band, or what's your favorite game to play? And this really helps you get to know your students, and it helps your students understand that you care about them more than just, is your name Sally Struthers? Chat with students before class. I was always in my classroom at least 15 minutes beforehand so that I could chat with my students. Now, that's not always possible because sometimes we have back-to-back classes and they're not in the same classroom. But if it is possible, make sure that you're greeting your students and that you're chatting with them, and you're not just monopolizing one person over another, but that you're equally accessible to all of your students. Demonstrating care for students is very important. We can look at it through the eyes of the golden rule. So treat the student the same way that you would want somebody to treat you. Smile, say hello, extend a deadline if needed. If they come to you and they say, my car broke down and my kid's sister got into a wreck, is that deadline more important than showing your student that you care about them? You do need to hold your student accountable, but make sure that if you are holding them accountable, that you're explaining to them in a kind, rational way why you have to impose that penalty. So if they've been late to class 5 times and you take a points for attendance, you have to let them know, I understand that sometimes things happen. You've been late 5 times. It's not going to be a large portion off of your grade, and the more you miss, then the more that you're missing out in class. And so giving them that reason why, as opposed to just, well, that's 2 points off because you've been late 5 times, is going to help them to not have a negative reaction to that accountability. Student success is one of the most important things to us as professors, because the more successful our students are, the more successful we are. So myself and Bruce both believe that when life happens, send me an email. If something happens in their life, we don't know it unless they communicate. And if we don't have a rapport of empathy and care, then they don't feel like they can communicate with us. And thus they will have a harder time catching up or becoming successful. So communicating to your students from day one that if something happens, let me know. I'm not a person who's going to, be hard and fast and cruel, that I do have care and empathy that's going to lead to better communication so that your students are communicating with you and that you can show them that care and empathy. Making accommodations, showing care and empathy doesn't mean that you're showing weakness. It doesn't mean that you give every student an A. It doesn't mean inflating grades. It's finding a way to make things work for students. If you have a student who has a child and they can't find childcare, allowing them to Zoom instead of be in the physical classroom is one way that you can accommodate them. It allows your student to understand that you have care and empathy for them. So one of the great examples of care and empathy during the COVID-19 crisis happened in New Jersey. So during the early phases, we all know that there was a toilet paper shortage. For whatever reason, people thought they needed to hoard toilet paper. So the Warren County Community College in New Jersey purchased toilet paper from industrial suppliers and distributed it to their students and faculty and staff. They also bought gift cards from restaurants to give to their students who were out of a job, so that they would be able to eat, because we know that if students can't take care of their needs, then they're not going to be able to be successful in our classrooms. They had their faculty call students at least 3 times during that spring semester to have them check on students' well-being. And it really showed that the most important thing to that college was their students, which should be what's important to us as well, because without our students, we don't have a job. So when I was talking about this hierarchy of needs, there's no way for our students to reach their true potential if they can't supply those basic needs for themselves, like air, water, food, rest, health, shelter, those kinds of things. And so if they can't achieve those basic needs, there's no way that they can come up to those higher levels of needs and be able to participate fully in our class. So that's why we have things on campus like the food pantry and counseling services. And if you see a student in need, the best thing to do is reach out to them and see what you can do, see what resources you can guide them towards to help them so that they can be successful in your class. So Maslow's ideas have endured because they echo universal experiences and common sense. We know that being thirsty or hungry will prevent us from learning or doing our jobs well. We also know that students who feel unsafe are unable to learn. So again, showing that care and empathy will allow you to help your students be successful. So I hope that you have enjoyed this lecture about empathy and care and rapport, and hopefully you can incorporate some of these strategies into your current classroom and show our students really just how much we care for them here at CSC.